Hey, how's it going? It's the game, dude. I'm sorry I haven't been uploading a video, guys. Long I haven't been doing a lot of personal stuff and everything. We're trying to find a good, better camera, better phone, which I finally have. As you can, if you can tell, really tell the difference. But now it's more storage, so I'll be able to make these videos longer. Hopefully, let's just hope. So as you know, as by today, and hopefully by the time this video is uploaded, it'll be December the 13th. What makes it Friday? It's a Friday, and that's what you guessed it. Time to talk about the Friday the 13th collection again. More importantly, the movies and everything. But this time I got something new when I got for my birthday 2 months ago. That is, of course, the famous Crystal Lake Memories, which is the history of Friday the 13th. Made back in 2005, and man, it's this thing like not that expensive, but the fact that no, it hasn't been expanded or enhanced, unlike say the other books, like say the SpongeBob or Back to the Future and everything. But pretty good book for 2005. And admittedly, if you wanted to expand it and verses, I sort of suggest you get the documentary version, which I'm gonna get soon, but not now. But this book is pretty good especially if you want to learn a lot of stuff about it and everything. Pretty good pages and everything. Good book. Pretty good book. But the reason why I want to talk about this collection again, specifically this collection again, is because I want to try my best to try to summarize and give my more descriptive reviews of the films individually. But just so you know, I'm only going to talk about the ones I've seen and everything, and all that stuff. So if I skip over one, it's because either I have nothing to talk about or probably wasn't interested in. So pretty good, still good collection, and everything. So I'm gonna try my best to try to be descriptive with one, and hopefully I have time and storage for this. Let's hope. But the first one I want to talk about is, of course, the first Friday the 13th. Now, to give my summary of Friday the 13th, is pretty much one of those Halloween ripoffs and everything. By a bunch of teenagers getting killed by an unknown stalker. And even if you disagree saying it's a ripoff, keep in mind both Victor Miller and Sean S. Cunningham have agreed that they pretty much saw Halloween and just wanted to do a movie based on that. But instead of in the neighborhood, in the suburbs, it's now in a summer camp, which makes it, different and everything. So in a way, these are all kind of summer movies, but pretty good for what they are. But you notice I don't talk about the first one that much in my other videos. That's because as much as I like it, it's not really. It's memorable, but even I'll admit that for a first film, especially one by Sean Cunningham, it's kind of very slow and everything. Of course, some of the first four movies are slow burns, but this one took the cake, and even in the uncut version, which in the uncut, all it has is just extends the violence and everything. But even at the theatrical version, everything ran long and everything. But that's how some horror movies go. That you end up getting along or not. But what do I think of the cast? I think all the cast are great. Kevin Bacon is the best and everything. I think the actress who plays Alice Hardy is good. Makes me wish that she was in every one of them. But then again, if it wasn't for her death, we wouldn't have had Tommy Jarvis in the later ones. So you know, there's a kind of a negative and a positive there. So somewhere, the effects by Tom Savini are pretty good and everything, and very simplistic for a guy who does all kinds of zombie movies, horror movies, and everything. Especially also starred in movies himself, but that's neither here nor there. But even for the uncut version, which is it's still pretty much tame compared to like nowadays and everything, thanks to new films and everything, especially a lot of new ones, especially when Cronenberg and everything came out, and kind of took it, kind of blew all these movies out of the water and everything. So, but it's a pretty good film. Is it memorable? Well, aside from the plot twist, some people forget that Pamela Voorhees was the killer, and some people tend to forget that. But aside from that, I thought Betsy Palmer was pretty good as Pamela, even though at this film she was named Mrs. Voorhees, and she even had her first name not until the fourth one, actually, not until final chapter and everything. But it's pretty good. One is, like I said, if you get through some of the slow parts, you'll probably like it. But some people still there's still some group of fans that there's just half split in half. One who just like the first movie and only want the first movie to be a first movie because that's what Cunningham and Miller planned for originally because there was going to be no other killers beside Pamela, but, and there's people like me who like the rest of the ones, but like I said, I'm more like I like this one along with the other ones. Almost every one of them, you'll see later. But this one, pretty good for what it is. Man, it's pretty good for what it is, and nothing bad to say about it and everything. But for a film for a film that cost less than $500,000, that's pretty good and everything. It's too bad the other films didn't make as much in the box office as the other ones. You know what I mean? It's just it made like millions. Meanwhile, the other ones kind of like they had an audience, but it wasn't like as much as the first film had and everything. But and I like Kid Jason in this one if we can barely see him. But like I said, if you see the behind the scenes stills, he had a pretty good face and everything, and it's not that bad and everything. But pretty good. As you can see, mine's an alternate cover, so if I open it up, it will show it a poster in the front right there. If I switched it, but this one's pretty good. But I understand why people like the other one. Got a poster. Yeah, but that's my views on the first film. Not as much as Stay, as much as It's like it's pretty good, pretty good. And here's the other one, which is part two, and which is like a direct sequel to the second one. It kind of is, and it kind of isn't. And by that I mean it's because I would say spoilers, but it's in the beginning of the film anyway, which is that Alice sadly dies not long after the events of the first film, which I believe takes place 4 months after the events of this movie in the beginning, and after that time skips like 4 years late. No, wait, 5 years later into the film. The reason why I say that because the first film took place in 1979, despite movie being released in 1980. But the events happened in 1979, so 5 years later, it's now 1984. Despite this film being made in 1981, yes, that's what it says right here in the back, 81. But so a lot of people say they couldn't understand continuity now. Well, guess what? You couldn't even understand back then because even time skipped 5 years later to the fictional year of 1984 when final chapter was actually released, which is kind of an eerie coincidence if you think about it. But my stance on the second one is pretty good. If I had to say which one from the original four movies I like, we'll have to look at that later. But the second one had its own treats, and it made some of the amendments in the first one, which was it's a bit slow, but not as slow as the first one. Some people love the female character. I forgot her name. Not Alice, but the other one, played by Amy Still. I forget her name. I forgot her name. Her character. Hold on. Ginny, yeah, Ginny. Was it Ginny? Let me think. I think it was Ginny Field. Yeah, Ginny Field. Sorry about that. I had to think about it for a moment. I keep forgetting these numbers because it's kind of confusing. But yeah, Ginny, I thought she was a kind of a better character to Adrian, but I thought Adrian was good. Especially liked her character as much, like especially her hairstyle, her clothes. She was a good painter. Her character was at least. I don't know about the actress, but her character was great and everything. But Ginny has a better, and I've heard has a better special heart when it comes to the female protagonist, and I can understand why because she looks better looking. She has that Sakut mode that helped her defeat Jason and everything, and personally, I like her. If I had to compare which one I like best, I think I have to go with Adriana. No, well, that's the actress. I meant to go. Alice, was it? I think it was Alice. But I'd rather go with her instead of Ginny. But that's my own personal preference. Personally, she actually lasted longer, like unlike Alice and everything. But that's here to near or there. What do I think of the second movie? I think it's pretty good. I mean, yeah, sure. It doesn't. Only the first movie ever took place in New Jersey. This one was filmed in Connecticut, but you wouldn't know the difference because Connecticut and New Jersey are so close to each other. You would actually confuse the same two, and that's why there's still some people to this day think they filmed in New Jersey, but in reality they really didn't. It was in New Connecticut and everything. So I just feel bad for the third and fourth ones because they only film in California, and you can always tell the difference no matter how hard they try with the whole New Jersey nature and everything. But it's like it's different. I don't know why they didn't do it because I don't think it was like that expensive, like say New York or something from Part Eight and everything. But yeah, I like it. Part two is good. What do I think of Jason's design with the burlap sack and everything? Well, it's for what it is, it's fine. It's what I pictured what Jason would be if he was really surviving out in the woods for many years, which is that he would take clothes from stealing clothes from other people from random places near the lake, which include his checkered button-up shirt along with his overall and trousers and even his burlap sack. But like I said, it's believable. Makes him more like a hermit and everything, which I think in reality he would be looking like. But which I think it will work. I just didn't like the red hair they gave him because, well, I don't know what they said in the book. I can't remember what they said in the book, but from what I can remember, I don't know if he really had red hair. I thought he was. I keep hearing he was a blonde, but then I keep hearing he was black haired. I don't know. I never met the script because of the fact that, well, he never grew hair ever in the franchise aside from the second one. The fourth one, technically, if you look very carefully, especially at the makeup design, and even Jason X, pretty much. But as a design for how what Jason really looked like, part two is the best one out of all of them. When it comes to making the hermit look and everything, looks pretty cool and everything. But what do I think of his face and everything? Well, it's not the best, really. I mean, yeah, sure, I do like the cool design. It looks very like his hair and everything looks very patchy, and especially for a guy who has that many disabilities on his face and everything. I don't know the word for that, but I imagine it would look like if he had grown hair along with the kind of beard, it would be looking patchy. Parts of his, I mean, not all of his face would be covered because of the fact that, well, because his bulbous head wouldn't cover half of it and everything. But I think it works for that film and everything. But it really proves that he really is human and everything. As much as people like disagree or not disagree, but as a film, it's pretty good for what it is. And Betsy Palmer made her appearance in part two. Some people tend to forget she was in it as a cameo. Jason's mother, even Betsy, kind of tends to forget too. Especially before she died, she was in many those horror cons and everything like that. She always said the first one was always her only one, but then people remind her for part two, and she tends to forget. And it's kind of obvious because the cameo was from what I've heard, the cameo was short. That was filmed in her house. They filmed her somewhere in her house in a room where they blacked out everything, made her wear a black sweater to believe that she was like this floating head or something. I don't know what the deal was about that with that part, but I understand why they put it because all this child psychology thing will work on Jason because he technically would have a mind of a 8 or 10-year-old pretty much, even though he's pretty much skilled at archery, hunting, he can hunt animals easily, everything. But like I said, with Jason, it's pretty. You get one thing and then you get another. You get one thing and another. In one movie, like this one, he's not that smart. But say in part four, he somehow gets smarter. But despite the fact that he's technically still has a child of a 10-year-old, that he gets easily, you know, gets easily not manipulated, but what's it called? Easily distracted by things, whether it looks like him or his mother. It's weird. It goes hand in hand pretty much with each other. But what do I think of part two? I think everything's good about it. I think Steve Miner did a pretty good job at capturing the first movie look, especially since he was the one of the many production. I wouldn't say production design. What's it called? Like a unit director and everything in this movie. And he learned a lot, especially in the first two movies. But this one, it was his best. Was Steve Miner's best because, like I said, it had the New Jersey feel. That's by being filmed in Connecticut. Had all that stuff, and like I said, it's pretty much good. I like it more than the third one actually, but Some people like the third one, but I like the second one for what it is. Still has that old vintage film look as from the first film had. Old technology and everything. And everything. Of course, you won't notice in here because, like, thanks to this whole 4K process they use, it's not in 4K. It's not the disc are not in 4K, but they use a lot of the film process to make it look better and everything without the static in this and everything. And I think it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So yeah, what I think of the second one, it's pretty good. The first one is just good. There's a difference between pretty good and then good. The second one was pretty good for what it is. And I do like the minimalistic posters and everything. You can tell the second one is kind of based off of the first one, which is without the people and the parents, and they switched the knife to a hatchet or an axe. I can't tell which is which. But I always like simplistic posters because it just takes words to get you across what kind of film it is, and this one is the best because it says body count continues, and that says a lot. Despite the fact it's not filmed, despite the fact the film doesn't take place the day after, that's actually two to four. It's like that, but still, it does continue. Speaking of which, we have part 3 in 3D. As you can tell, this is one of these backward posters. I probably will switch it to the other one because, admittedly, even as much as I'd like to switch it around, admittedly, this part of Jason is weird looking. I mean, he has this weird mask and his shirt is purple for some reason. He looks almost like his Nest game variant, which is weird. Which is like all blue and purple. As you can tell, the original poster was one on disc where it looks like same body figure but in a shower, despite being no shower kill. That's in the fourth one. And here's Jason in his old Hockey Glory green shirt. Of course, even though I said I like the part 2 ones, if I had to click the one, it would probably be not this one actually, but the fourth one. And I wish I could show you pictures of that, but some of them don't have it, and you have to really look at the movies to see it. But why don't you like the third one? You asked because it's fine for what it is. I just didn't like the face, Jason Voorhees' face in this one because even if I didn't like part 2s, it still had that feeling that realistically it will look like he was a hermit. In this one, I don't know what he did. I don't know if he used that same axe that Ginny lodged into his shoulder or if he used it to shave off his hair. I don't know what he did, but for some reason, the next one, which takes place the day after, the second one, he somehow is bald and has no facial hair whatsoever. He bears a little resemblance of himself. And the second one, and it's weird, despite being, and this film was made when a year after the second one, which I think is pretty cool how this film was being made in under a year. But it's the first film filmed in Hollywood, California. Like I said, it's not pretty good because you can really tell it is because of the trees and everything and the natures, especially from the forest. The lake and the third one's not the best because, as we all know, it's a man-made lake they made, which is why the water looked very dirty and not very crystal-like, and unlike Crystal Lake, that's why it's called that. But it's weird, and it wasn't given that name and everything. But it's like take it or leave it. But it's fun trivia. Is that the lake they used in part 3 dried up and everything. So if you wonder why in the final chapter, which is part 4, why you didn't see the lake and everything, well, I like to think it was there, but in reality, what they don't tell you is that it was probably because it dried up that summer and everything, and all that stuff was gone, which is why you only saw the house and the barn and everything, which explains it. Because, like I say, really look closely at the thing. It looks very dirty. No one would want to swim there. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't want to swim in there either. I'd rather do it in the first 2 films, even the fourth film, because at least in that one they actually put it in a lake. But still. But aside from those things, do I have any positives about this film? Not as much, really. In fact, everything I kind of forget, and I don't tend to forget this exists. Actually, that's the Final Friday, but still, it's something I don't want to. I don't hate it or anything. It's just like I said, it's not as memorable as the second one or the fourth one. The third one had to be if you had to count 2 through 4, it had to be third one was the third one, it was the middle. It was just there to be there. It bridged the gap between the second and fourth one, which I appreciate for. But I've had to judge it on its own. It's like like if I had to say if this was the last movie and not part 4, then That would kind of suck. It would kind of sucked. Kind of did suck. Kind of did, yeah. But I do like the hockey mask immediately in part three because it looked more clean looking. It had all the red marks. I forget what these are called in the movie because part four, especially during the final chase, they kind of these asterisks I think they're called. They're not asterisks, but the red ones they kind of disappear and they only live behind the one on top. Because I think it's because all the rain you see in the ending of the movie that it peeled off and everything. You can really tell, especially when you see in the editing process. It's one scene and everything, but we'll talk about that later. But in this one, it has all the marks. It looks white and everything's clean. It's what I'm imagining what his mask would look like in part four if if it wasn't dirty looking and everything. But I didn't mind. I didn't mind it. Like I said, the dream sequence was fine for what it is. I mean, looking at the original, I probably would have liked the original one better. Probably been more surprising and shocking. Of course, the one thing I didn't like about it was actually, Jason's original face, because you looked up production stills and everything, including in his Blu-ray and even in documentaries, his face in the original Part 3 thing wasn't really that good. He looked more like an Orlok than a human, which is weird. And plus, one of his eyes was supposed to be crooked and and everything looking up. And this one, I think Stan Winston kind of forgot about that, and he wasn't thinking. But props for him for trying, for giving it his all. Especially when he was in the other franchise. A lot of people tend to forget he was in the first, second one, and third one for like one day or something, and then for some reason he left for other projects. I don't know what happened. But the fact he technically came back twice and everything, it's just like it's amazing fleet. It really is. Like I said, Steve Meyer did a good job, but like I said, I prefer part 2 than 3, and everything because it's good. The theme is it catchy? Well, part 4 is the better theme for me. The third one is pretty good if you want that 80s techno vibe and everything. Like it came out of those 80s horror playlists you've seen play in schools and everything. That's something you can actually believe in, which is kind of weird, but it works. It works for what it is. But I like it. I like the way Jason looked like in part 3 and everything. He looks pretty good in it. It's just not the face. Neither the Stan Winston one or not even the final one was pretty good either. But the third one but the final product I'll give props for it making an attempt to look more like his part 1 counterpart, just a bit, but not a lot. Not a lot. Yeah. So yeah, that's part 3. It's a pretty good film. What do I think of the protagonist? Well, she's no Ginny and everything, and she's not even no Alice either. Anything. A lot of people think she was the best, but not in my way, not really. And the reason why I can say that is because as we all know, in the ending of the part 3 one, after the dream sequence her mind ended up breaking, as you can see, and as you remember in the final shot, she was like laughing hysterically and almost crying to the point of a police car when she was taking a breath. So I have a feeling even if part 4 did kill her off or did mention her, I don't think she would have been well off in part 4 and everything because she looked even more afraid and even more crazy, and she was even more afraid of the Higgins Haven than and she is, and that's how Chris is. That's her name, Chris Higgins. It's kind of hard to remember sometimes. Not always, but still. But, I still prefer Alice over her, and even if I had to choose between Alice and Chris, I prefer Alice because she actually stood out way better than Chris did. Not because, and you could say the circumstances are different, which I agree. But like I said, it's like Ginny ended up being a better heroine and everything than Chris was mainly because yeah, sure, she had the same dream sequence and everything as Chris did, but her mind didn't break as far as we know. Because as last we saw her, she was taken to the hospital. We can determine she was probably okay mentally wise. Maybe mentally wise, she's a bit scarred, but not as scarred as Chris was. Because she was like, her mind, like I said, broke and everything. And, some people like her better, but I like Alice more, admittedly. If I had to choose her between Adrienne King, well, not Adrienne King, I mean Alice. I still put Alice over Chris. Yeah, sorry about that, but still. But yeah, that's part 3. Part 4, the final chapter, everybody's favorite. and I have to admit, it's mine too. Out of all the original four, I choose four and more, mainly because, and not because it feels more of a horror film or not because other people say it's because I have my own personal preferences in it. One of it being that Jason looks way more better than his two and three counterpart. And my guess is if he took off the axe mark he left on his head and looked at his original face before the axe mark, that's originally what he's supposed to look like in the first film. But I don't know what happened. The makeup department kept changing his face to make it look different every time, which I think is weird. And in my own personal theory, I like to believe we're all in the heroine's, in the lady's protagonist's head. And how that theory works is that um, when it came to part two, it happened in Ginny's head, and since it happened in her head, it's possible that Jason's face you see in the in the in the dream is possible. It's not even Jason's real face. It's possible. I like to think my theory goes is that part four's Jason's face was the canon one in two and three. It's just that the faces we keep seeing in say two and three is all from repressed memories or something like that, or dramatized from the Alice and Chris's no Jenny and Chris's mind. And for Ginny, it makes sense because think about it. She's a child psychologist. She got so traumatized, not just by Jason, but by his face when she took off the mask, took off his sack. And she got so traumatized by his disfigured face, disformed face, that she tried to imagine the other part of his head looking more human, which is why you always see the beard and the red head and more face in the other half, but yet at the same time you see this disfigured half on his right side. I have a feeling she made it up in her own head to try to try to what's that phrase called? Um, suppress it. Yes, suppress his face from her mind. That she tried to make it up her own. And that makes sense because like I said, it was that dream sequence was all in her head, and it was because like I said, when she pulled out the sack and everything from his head, the camera didn't pan to his face for what it was, and we didn't see. But yet the next shot, which happens to be in a dream, it somehow shows his head, his face, and yet the other half looks normal. And anybody who's seen the original face from part one knows that that's not really true because even in his left half, it still looks deformed, just not as much as his right. And as for Chris, well, Chris one was a bit tricky for me to try to theorize, but I like to think it's possible that when she was trying to talk about her, thinking about her attacker and everything, especially when she was trying to repress her for years, it's possible that she imagined the attacker's face with Jason's face, and that's why his face is different in part three. Is because it's possible she was projecting the attacker's face onto Jason, which is why she saw it differently than how everybody else would have seen it. And think about it, she is the only one who ever saw Jason's face because nobody else did. And if they did, they probably got killed, so they couldn't remember it and everything. Especially when the camera make sure never to see his face and everything, both part two and three, respectively. So if you think about it, she would be the only one who would have ever saw Jason's face. And it's possible, like Jenny, she got very traumatized by his real face that she tried to put the attacker's face, who may or may not be Jason, onto Jason's face, and it more resembled the attacker, which is why she was like you and everything when she saw him. Even though I'm pretty sure Jason wouldn't know who she is and everything. But, that's a whole other camera. It's possible the attacker wasn't Jason in the first place. It was just another person, Herman, who was lost and everything. But I don't know. I'm trying to figure what Chris is trying to be figuring out. But Jay Chris's would also make sense in a way, especially from a mental and psychological standpoint and everything, that she would try to put her attacker's face on Jason. That's why I like to think that part four's Jason's face was always his face. But like I said, Alice and Chris was so traumatized they just imagined different faces on it to make it more, what they saw in their own head. But going back to part four, I like Jason's design more in part four because not only because of his face, because if you look very closely, especially when his unmasking scene came out, when he turned his head, you can actually see strands of hair on his head, meaning that he did have hair in the first place. But who knows what it was because it's so patchy and it was so dark in the scene that you couldn't see what it was. But it could have been black hair for all we know. His face matches what it would look like he was like if it was like 30 years ago, if he would have been 40 at that time, which wouldn't make sense. His dress shirt looks modified from his third one if you look closely, but I liked it more because it was buttoned up and everything. It looks pretty cooler, if not dirtier, because remember, and because from what was weird, in part four, his clothes were somehow more dirtied and everything, and more damaged. Whereas in part three, it barely got damaged and everything. In fact, the only thing that was damaged in his clothing was when Chris stabbed him in his leg, and it was bleeding. But aside from that, for some reason, if you look closely at some of the scenes, had black dirt patches all over. So it doesn't make sense because we didn't see it in the third one. But they're trying to make it look like he aged and everything, like badly after the attack. Which props to them for trying to connect it more to the third one because most films will never do it, especially on a different director, who was in this film Joseph Zito. So I have to give him props for connecting it to the second and third one because most directors wouldn't do that in some of these franchises. Which I have to respect this franchise as a whole for the directors having them to be trying to connect every film back to back, especially from parts 1 through 7, which I think is an interesting take. But you got to admire the directors for actually doing that because most of the time, sometimes they don't. Unless, of course, say a franchise was based on books or something, they had to connect it one way or another. But I like his design more, and the fourth one way more better than everybody. If I had to pick a favorite human Jason, it would be part four. Obviously, I would choose part two, but only if somebody said, "What if he looked like if he was unkept and everything?" Yeah, I say part two. But if I had to pick his human counterpart close to his appearance in the first one, it would obviously be part four. Obviously, especially since Tom Savini came back and everything, and the fourth one, which you never think would happen, but everything. But it's pretty good. And a lot of people, going and looking back, what do I think of the Harry Man from Dini scores and everything? Well, each film is fine for what it is. Sometimes you can't direct differentiate one from the other, and that's not on purpose. I'm pretty sure Man for Dini did not only at the same time, but also to because sometimes some of the films were familiar, but I like part four is better because if you heard the theme when the title sequence came out, it was more frightening and everything because at this point in the fourth one, Jason learned from his experiences from the second and third one that he became faster, smarter, and everything thanks to the stunt man. What's his name? I forgot his name. I can't believe I forgot him. Um, forget Ted White. Yes, Ted White. He was the best Jason, the best human Jason. That is, and everything. Ted White, yeah, was good and everything. Pretty good. It's good. It's pretty. I think it's pretty good that he was in. He was in it. And he was very good at it. Well, he was. He was. But aside from that, I think that every score was good and everything, especially in the later films. But four was my favorite one because especially in the main theme, and my other score from him was also Jason's death and everything because especially when it showed his face, it had the dramatic stings and everything that from him. I don't understand music, but those are my favorite scores from him and everything from the franchise. Pretty good. And so for someone to call the final chapter and everything is pretty good. If Jason would have died in the other films, I like to imagine his death in part four would have actually been a definitive way to go. But they should have. But if it was more definitive, they should have made it more definitive by making it. I don't know, his head chop off, or like what Tom Savini wanted, which was that his head explode from a microwave and everything. All that stuff. It would have been more definitive end to Jason and everything, but we didn't get that because the producers wanted to keep it there just in case. They always say it's always a just in case thing for them. And as we've seen from the other films, it kind of proven right. But still, part four is the best out of all the franchise. Well, I had to pick a hard debate between this one and part seven. But I have to pick like I said, if I had to pick up the favorite out of the Human Jason quadrilogy, I guess that you would call it, it would be a final chapter. No question about it. I like this poster more than the iconic one, not because But it is because, like I said, simplicity and also the words and everything, all that stuff. But I like the poster, what it says right here, and everything, what it is. I just don't like the fact that his axe mark is on the other side, which didn't make sense. Unless, of course, they mirrored the shot. They probably did. But yeah, I like it. I like Corey Feldman as Tommy and everything. It's pretty good as a kid. Tommy. If I had to pick my favorite Tommy, it'd be the one from Part 6 because I imagine that's what Tommy would look like, especially in his later years from now on. I'm really glad that the actor who played him in Part 6 went on to play him for a long time. Even though some people want Corey Feldman to come back, it'd be interesting, but it's been long. It's been long ago. Then who knows? I don't know. I would like to keep the other guy than Corey, but that's my own preference, and everybody else's really. But sorry about that. But for part four, it's pretty good, and yeah, part four is the best and everything. But like I said, not all the films are bad. Well, not all of them, of course. Okay, for this next one and everything, it'd be the one that's the most underrated in my opinion, which is part five, A New Beginning. And like I said, I like the original poster right here because it says a lot and everything in a few words. It's scary and everything, much unlike the other one, which is weird looking. I don't know why. What's the deal with that? It's weird. Part five. Some people don't like it, but it's nowadays. It's now the Halloween 3 equivalent of the underrated franchise people overlook now. It's underrated now, and like part three, it's the most underrated, but at the same time, mainly because, like I said, it went to the same thing what part three went to, which is that the killer wasn't present, meaning Jason wasn't in it and everything. Just like how Halloween 3, Michael Myers wasn't in it either, and in either. But I like it. I thought Roy was good. I wish he had more of a development and everything, and I wish his story would have made more sense, admittedly, and everything. But from what was given and everything for the fifth film was pretty good. The director here, Danny Steinman and everything, he's pretty good. But that's what you get when you hire an X-rated film director to be in make a horror film, which is one of the only good things about this friend was the gratuitous nudity, which is like a lot of it more than the other franchise combined. Not even Jason X had this much graphic nudity, and that was Jason X, or hell, even the 2009 Friday film, and that was that film made by Michael Bay's production, Platinum Duns. But yeah, this time had way more nudity than the other films combined, which is a lot. But besides that, what did I think of the film? It's it's actually pretty excellent. Actually, I put the same excellency as part four mainly because, like I said, people need to talk about the fifth one more and the fourth one because, like, the fourth one is pretty good because, like I said, they actually tried taking it in a direction. Because unlike, say, with John Carpenter or even Deborah Hill, they wanted to take that Halloween franchise to a new direction, but the studio didn't. In this one, surprisingly, the studio wanted to go in a new direction. But, box office and dollars and audience members spoke differently, and they brought Jason back. But, I think the actor who played Tommy in this one, well, much as I like his commitment to the deal and having to go with actual mental asylums to look at people who have the same kind of thing that Tommy went through, and much as I like him for his dedication and everything, he's no Tom Matthews and he's no Corey Feldman either. And everything. I think he thought so too, because why do you think this is like his only film debut as far as we know? Because after that he became a Christian after this, and the rest is history with him. But it's like it was its own thing. Like I said, Roy was fine. I just wish he had more development, more understanding, more than what we got in the ending. It was still weird because he was more human than Jason was, but yeah, for some reason he was able to tackle down doors. He survived being struck by a vehicle and everything, bleeding out, but yeah, he was still walking. I don't know. like I said, I think the filmmakers and the screenwriters were trying to go one way or the other, kind of like they did with Jason. But whereas Jason, it makes sense because he may be supernatural. He leans kind of in the middle. Roy, he was human, so I don't know what the deal was with that. It was weird. Obviously, it was very weird. Are some of the actors memorable? The characters memorable? Like I said, aside from Tommy and Roy, not that much. I think the little kid, I forgot his name, he was good in it. The only one who can think of was memorable was the one who had the stuttering problem from the Pine Grove. Was it Pine Grove? No, Pinehurst. Sorry, Pinehurst. Why did I say Pine Grove? Pinehurst. Yeah, I think he was the only memorable one. You could. Some people say that the chick with the robot dance moves was good. Thought she was fine, but I wish more knew more about her, along with the other ones and the many other ones, including the ones who liked to let's say intercourse more than the other ones did. But still, I thought the ones were fine. I thought Pam was fine. She was good in it for what she was. Like I said, the only one memorable time was the kid, and of course the one with the stuttering in Pinehurst. What I think of Pinehurst is a pretty good location. Like I said, with this one, I couldn't really tell if it was in California until I actually looked it up because, unlike saying Part 3 and everything, where they couldn't really hide the fact it took place in California, Part 4 and 5 managed to do it the best, really, with location and everything, filming, which pretty clever on their part. And let's see, Manfredini film scores best as always. Not much to tell. Instead of saying Kiki, Mama, it's Kiki Tata because T is for Tommy. Especially when the new franchise original plan was to want to make Tommy the killer and make him the new Jason. And originally the three film wouldn't start with the final chapter. New beginning would have been mentioned when referencing Tommy's beginning. The third one went about his definitive growth at the killer next to Jason, but sorry. Part 6 happened. Jason came back from the dead, and like I said, the rest is history with that one. Makes you wonder what the other franchise would have been like if it would have kept going that way direction, but I don't think it would have been the same really because I don't think with Halloween where they could have done more with it. Friday was Jason's movie, and it was always was Jason's movie, kind of like how Nightmare was Freddy's movies. It could never be anyone else's, even if they did try, which made me think there should have been less movies from both sides of the franchise that wanted to have, it, but you can't. But studios want that money, and So yeah, I gotta give props to Paramount for actually themselves for actually doing it because most studios don't want to go that direction, but they did. And let's say, well, they tried. But yeah, it's pretty good. Film's pretty good, pretty underrated. More people should see it and everything. So, but yeah, underrated indeed. Now here, of course, the one is the one that rebirthed the supernatural, and that is, of course, Jason Lives Friday Part 6. I always like the poster right here in the beginning. It shows, this is supernatural, something wicked would come and everything. Made by a famous director, Tom McLaughlin. I've heard of online about the fan films he wanted to make. They're pretty interesting, but admittedly, but they were good in the Friday universe. In the supernatural, from the supernatural films, yes, they would. But if they wanted to go back to the Jason human roots, that wouldn't have fitted, admittedly, pretty well. They would have tried, but like I said, what's not this franchise but not trying new directions? Like almost all the time. But that's how it goes. That's how it goes. But yeah, 6 was pretty good. It's the most iconic next to part 4 and 7. It's the most iconic because us features undead Jason for the first time. Like kind of like here, but this is part 7. Jason, you can tell. Part 6, pretty much where undead Jason happened. Right here, as you can see it from the back of this. There's undead part 6 Jason. He looks pretty good for what he was. Especially, played by two different stuntmen, one from one day and the rest from the rest of the other days, which I think is pretty interesting. Nobody talks about that really. I gotta give credit to the first stuntman who played Jason from the paintball scene because that was his one and only scene ever in that direction. You can tell it was a different dude because if you looked at Jason's physicality in that scene along with the other scenes, you can tell he looked different. And he even looked different. Like he had a bigger head and everything. I don't know if that was just me, but he had a bigger head than his mask was, which I think was weird and interesting. But he did good for that one day, and the other actor did good for the other days, which I think is good. Tom McLaughlin was a good director. He really knew how to do that whole Universal horror movie tropes and everything with the lightning and everything. Zombies coming, zombies coming back from the grave. I think it's pretty awesome, especially if you're a fan of those stuff and everything. You gotta like it. And the fact that the film went more into part five says a lot about Jason. That he is well more beloved than well even Tommy to this point. It's pretty much iconic everything. But yeah, I like the film and everything. I do like the new intention Wade, how Tommy wanted to get him to die, which is I bury him in the lake, even though it was his fault that Jason pretty much came back to life. But what can you do when you're so driven by psychological torment that you're willing to do anything? But I'm not a psychologist, so what would I know? But part six is pretty good. Alice Cooper's song "Man Behind the Ass" is pretty good for what it is. Really, really pure horror stuff. Really pure horror stuff right there. Next to Motorhead, Hellraiser, even Nightmares. I don't think Nightmare had their own music video. I could be wrong, but I had to choose between Alice Cooper and Motorhead's respective songs. I had to choose Hellraiser because that's the more entertaining song in my head, and I'm more of a Motorhead than I am Alice Cooper. I'm a huge metal fan, but so like I said, that's why I found his his song entertaining mostly, especially in the end credits. But Manfred Dini's score is the best, especially in this one because this really proves that now he's more supernatural. He's almost unstoppable compared to part four and everything. He's more brutal. Almost impenetrable, and everything, which I think is way bigger fleet for Jason, than his human one could ever do. And yeah, made like around 1986. Like I said, people said that Nightmare and Halloween was 80s, was everyone's 80s, but I like to prove them wrong because in reality, everybody knows the 80s was the Fridays decades. The reason why I can say that is because, like I said, the first film made in 1918, and yet even if you didn't like Manhattan, it was still the last Paramount one, and that ended in 89 at the end of the decade. And that says a lot more about this franchise than say Nightmare or Halloween because the 80s was more Jason's day, pretty much, his whole decade. He had a whole decade of horror to himself. And yeah, sure, people like to say, well, this film was also represented in the 80s. And that's true. But I had to pick your favorite film slasher who dominated the 80s. It had to be mostly Jason. Jason and Jason only. He ruled the 80s from 80 to 89. That's an actual whole year. A whole year. A whole decade. Full of every kind of movie, almost made year back to back, except for some exceptions, but and everything. But the 80s was Jason's time. And Nightmare, well, yeah, sure, he did dominate back in '84 when that was his first film made. Admitted I liked him. He can be worked for any kind of decade because I like New Nightmare and that was made in 1996, I believe. I could be wrong. And Halloween was more '70s with Michael because he mostly came from the '70s and everything, so made sense. Yeah, Halloween was more '70s year, but like I said, Jason Voorhees was more '80s than Freddy ever was. But yeah, part six, love the film as itself, pretty good. People need to talk about this more than part seven. I like to think so. They really need to talk about it. But speaking of which, this is of course part seven, the new blood of being Tina and everything. What people like to call Jason versus Carrie, even though even though the rumors kind of dispelled once everybody learned that the screenwriter, I forgot who the screenwriter was, when he actually dispelled the rumor that it was originally supposed to be Carrie because a lot of people theorized it was supposed to be Carrie, but since they couldn't get the rights from Stephen King, they said, so they had to name her something else, which is Tina Shepard and everything. But in reality, the filmmaker said, well, yes, she does have the same attributes as Carrie. they didn't make it as like Jason versus Carrie thing. They just wanted it to be more supernatural than Part 6 was. And one of them had to be girls with psychic abilities, teenage girl with psychic abilities, and what better way is there? So yeah, it wasn't never supposed to be Jason and Carrie, even though we can call it Jason and Carrie because that's what it looks like. But it's not Carrie, if you know what I mean. But yeah, Part 7's Jason's iconic move was the best. That's what people say. And Kane Hodder, of course, his first introduction into the film, and not a damn time too soon. Yeah, favorite shot from this film and everything. I especially loved, much as I find underrated, much as underrated as the Part 6 Jason undead looked. I like Part 7 more because you can really tell he looks like somebody who's been through so much battle damage. You can actually pause the movies at some certain points during Jason's scenes, and you can actually see the damage he has on them, which was the knife gash from Tommy, the axe mark from Chris, the damaged up part of the mask from the from the blades in Part 6 when he was being dropped into the ocean, along with other attributes. He's more skeletal and everything due to the fact that he was decomposing in water, which I heard you can actually decompose faster down there, and everything. Henry Manfredini score is not in here, sadly. You noticed a lot of reuse shots, but the reason for that is because he had other commitments to other films, so he had to give it to another guy. I think his name was let me see, Fred Mullen. Fred Mullen did a good job for some of the scenes, but you can really tell which one's Manfredini's and which one's Mullen's because you can really tell, especially some of the way, especially in the introduction, you see a lot of booming effects in the opening credits, and you can tell that's Fred Mullen's work and not Manfredini's because you can just tell because the soundtrack, admittedly, was kind of uninspired here. Whereas to say even 6 or and everything were not even that good. 1 through 6 were actually good, but 7, well, that's the only downplay, which is that Part 7 soundtrack was not really that interesting, which is kind of sad. But like I said, for the Manfredini scores we hear, I gotta give Fred Mullins this. At least he managed to use some of Manfredini's music cues well here. I'll give him that. He used some of it well, especially whenever Jason's on screen, whenever he's gonna attack. Even though you can tell which one came from which movie, but still, he used it well. And everything. But what do I think of the actress who played Tina Sharp? She's pretty good. If I had to pick her out of, say, the other lady from Part 6 who was in love with Tommy, I picked Tina over her because she was actually more memorable. She actually was the only memorable character, like the other ones in Part 7, which were kind of unforgettable to, that blonde lady who was, being, I guess I could say she was a bitch. But aside from that, none of the other ones were memorable, really. Of course, what do I think of the other kid cast from the other ones that weren't in 1 through 3? Well, they were fine. For Part 4 was fine. I liked Crispin Glover's character. I liked the guy who was friends with him, called him a dead fuck and everything. Pretty fun and everything. They were the only 2 memorable ones. Like I said, Tommy was fine. His sister Trish was good. Her mother was actually good. And Part 5, Tommy was good. Like I said, Pam was good. Little kid. And one of them with the stuttering problems were good, but that's it. Part 6, in Part 6, I didn't mention Part 6, but Part 6, aside from Tommy, admittedly, nobody else was good. Aside from his love interests. But we don't really get much of her, only the fact that she somehow had a flirtation thing, which I don't get why, but, especially when he was spitting out of his mouth, but, but I guess in her mind, if he looked handsome enough, ignore everything he just said. But back to Part 7. Part 7, like I said, only Tina and Melissa. That's the blonde lady's name. Melissa. Nobody else remembers her besides her. Melissa, Jason. That's it. That's really it. Not even the mother was good. Not even the doctor was good. It was just mostly her. It was mostly Jason, Tina, and Melissa. Only that's it. Really. It was kind of a sad shame, but admittedly, But one of the only things that would have made it up was the cool deaths, but sadly those got cut and everything, and that's one of the things that leaves it more to be desired. But what it makes up for what it does lack in deaths, it makes up for in with Jason and everything. Every time when he's on screen and everything, they try their best with that. Tried their best. But it makes me wonder why people like Part Seven because that one's the one you could tell was severely cut down and everything, and especially in with everything else. But I think it's because they only like it because of Jason, the way Jason looks like in Part Seven, and of course Kane Hodder, which I guess makes sense. But still wish it could have been done more with the seventh one actually. That's why I rank it as good, pretty much. Not as excellent as Part Four, but not as great as say the first film actually, which is weird. But yeah, that's Part Seven. The other ones I'm kind of gonna skim through, not because of time and everything, it's because I really haven't seen much of these films. Really, not because I wasn't skip over because I only saw them a token few times or I didn't like it. Like take Jason Takes Me to Heaven. Everybody knows everybody. I mean, New York has a new problem. Well, film did have a problem, right? But this is mostly behind the scenes, so I can't really flack him on that. It's really mostly Paramount's for trying to promise something but never really happened. But for this one, I'm not going to take that long with because like I said, I only saw a few token times because aside from wanting to be a completionist, there was no other reason to see this film because he doesn't take Manhattan, he doesn't go anywhere near New York aside from Times Square in one shot of the film, mind you. Aside from that, not really. It's not really much to say. Everybody's more forgetful than in Part Seven, which you didn't think was that much of a fleet, but it turns out they managed to up your expectations with that one out of all things. Jason's resurrection here didn't even make sense because he was somehow resurrected by electricity for no reason, even though he could have been electrified any time within our time. But he wasn't, so I don't know what happened there. He looked very differently. He's somehow wearing gloves despite wearing no gloves in Part 7. In fact, the only time you see him in gloves in Part 7 was in the beginning where you see his Part 6 counterpart in the ocean. That was when he was wearing the yellow gloves. But if you notice throughout that film, in Part 7, his yellow gloves are gone. In fact, he's not even wearing gloves. But yet in this one, he's wearing gloves for some reason. And I don't know why. I don't know why. Maybe the filmmakers ignored Part 7, but if that's true, then I would think they would have done a better job of ignoring and have it say take place and have him be under the same rock as he was in Part 6, which is actually what Part 7 did, but that's what I'm saying. This film has a lot of problems, as you can see in the tagline. It did have a lot of new problems, but like I said, it was mostly in this film. Like I said, making criticisms on the film is like beating a dead horse at this point. So anything you haven't heard of is the same problems I had with this. But if you had to say to me, what about thinking as a film if you didn't count the other ones or if you didn't have the expectations? Well, it's still not a good film because, like I said, none of the characters were memorable. Jason himself wasn't even memorable. Yeah, Kane Hodder did a good job as usual, but even he couldn't save this film and everything. He all he needed to do was just try his best, which he did, and everything. It's just like he tried. And yeah, I mean, the makeup on Jason wasn't even as good as say in Part 7, which is like weird. And like I said, there's so many continuity problems that it makes the other continuity problems from 1 through 7 tame and cut by comparison because Part 8 made new holes than what the other ones did. This one tried to make up their own kind of logic. This one couldn't even try. But yeah, like I said, beating a dead horse at this point with Part 8. This next one, of course, is the most hated one of all. One I wouldn't even buy if it wasn't for this collection, which is, of course, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, which you think was also beating up a dead horse, but not really. People were starting to figure out that this one wasn't even good in the first place because this one made way more problems and plot holes than Part 8 did. And this one, Part 8, they tried to make up a new gimmick but failed. And this one tried to make new continuity and story lore that ended up not making sense, even to the Fridays franchise, and that's something to say. And much as Adam Marcus tried with his film, I'm gonna have to. If Marcos was in film school, with me, and I was his teacher, I would have kicked him out of film school because this was like, not even good. Not even good. Had more problems and everything. Jason's barely in it more than most of the other films, which I think is an interesting feat. So you can't say Keenan Harder saved this film because he's barely in it. Like a lot of continuity problems. Even as a film on its own doesn't make sense because it tried answering things, but then it didn't. Like I said, if this film's still on its own, this film would have been forgotten had it not been for Friday or Jason's Legacy and everything. Yeah, the only thing I'll compliment is Jason's design, really. But admittedly, aside from that, not much to say. Like I said, it's another dead horse to beat. And we can say, well, the kills make up for it because it's more gory and everything. But admittedly, much as I complain about the ones of Part 7, admittedly, gore was never a part of Friday the 13th's identity. Yeah, sure. We would love to see it more in the other films, but in reality, it was mostly just on the kills and Jason that made it memorable, and never the gore and kills. Even though not one teenager dies here, which I think is an amazing feat, but still not a lot. Like I said, don't like it. I rate this horrible, shouldn't exist rate. Like seriously, fuck this movie and what this mythos tried to do. And here we have Jason X, the new ones from the New Line Cinema movies, along with Jason Goes to Hell, which I forgot to tell you that all these films onward were all made by New Line Cinema because they bought the rights to the Jason character and everything because Paramount was losing money after Part 8 and they had to do something. So yeah, it was like, something. But if I had to give Part 10, I guess you say more credit is that, Part 10, well, Jason X tried making Jason and everything more close to the Paramount one. I'll give him Flea, but even then, admittedly, it's Jason in space, really. I mean, yeah, sure, it's a wacky concept, but, it wasn't much the mana damages that Final Friday did, especially even it made its own continuity problems. It's not as bad as Final Friday did, but, it was like, I mean, he had regeneration. I mean, Jason never had that ever in the franchise. Not even Final Friday, he had regenerative problems. He was more a demon, but still, he never had regeneration. I mean, this one he did, and despite the fact he's human in this one, Part 1 through 4, he didn't have regeneration. Yeah, he took damage and he recovered, but he still had damage on. He was still bleeding in places and everything. Even from his axe mark, his blood was still seeping in Part 4. So you can't say he had regeneration if he was just like still bleeding and everything from the face and everything. He gave him Wolverine powers for some reason, which I think is weird. And then Part 7, well, he was a skeleton at that point because if you said he had regeneration powers, Part 7 he would have been looking more human than a skeletal wet corpse. And even in Part 8, if you like to count that, he got throwing acid at his face, and he was in critical condition at that point during the sewage pipe thing, and that's something to think about. Really something to think about. So yeah, like I said, it tried its best trying to get close to Paramount, but like I said, it tried and failed. Even as its own thing, it's pretty good for it. Well, it's okay for its own thing, unlike the other ones. But sorry, but the other ones is nothing not as good. It's not. But I still rate it higher than Final Friday does, so that's something to say. Here we have, of course, the big matchup that remains since the 80s, which is Freddy versus Jason. I can't say much about this one because I haven't seen it yet. But if you wanted to say what are my 2 cents on Nightmare franchise, well, as you can already tell by some of the hints I dropped, which is that I really don't like the Nightmare franchise as much, and to be honest, I really don't like the Friday franchise that much. But before you guys send any hate comments and everything like that, I like the first Halloween movie. That's it, and Part 3, and also 3 Season of the Witch, because those were actually good original movies. It tried being its own thing, which I think is creative. It was good, excellent, really. Nightmare, well, Nightmare is difficult. I like the first film, obviously. I like New Nightmare because Wes Craven was directing both of those movies. I don't even like Part 3, and that says a lot. Some people like Part 3, but really Part 3 wasn't really I wouldn't say my favorite because, like I said, I only saw parts and bits and parts if I didn't finish it. But even then, I wouldn't I like only Part 1 and New Nightmare. So I didn't see the other ones. I didn't really even see the remake, really. I only ever saw the first movie once. I liked it that one time, and that's it. I saw New Nightmare 2 times, and I would rather buy those two movies than something like that. So it's like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Freddy and everything. And I can't say much about. That's why I'm talking more about this than the movie because the movie doesn't do anything for me and everything. And let's just say it did more continuity damage to Friday than it did to Nightmare because Nightmare had its own problems, even with the third one and everything. And that's a whole another rabbit hole that I'm not gonna get into because, like I said, I'm not that much of a fan as compared to like seeing Jason and everything. So I'll let the other fans and everything make their own videos on that. But yeah, that's all I have to say about this film. I wish Kane Hodder was been Jason, but no, they didn't. I don't know why this. I don't know why the director and said no. That was his first mistake, and even his last. When you think about it, he's not dead or anything. It's just he didn't make any more American films after this. He went back to those Korean movies, I think. Yeah, Hong Kong movies. Than he ever did with this one. So yeah, something. Here we have, of course, the one I talked about, New Platinum Dunes, i.e., New Line Cinemas, Friday the 13th, 2009. This one was more special because New Line actually partnered with Paramount. That's why it's called Friday the 13th, not Jason Reborn or something like that. What do I think of this? Well, if I didn't know anything about the first 7, 8, and even the New Line ones, I would think this film was good. But admittedly, this had a lot of Platinum Dunes signature work on it, which I think is not good. Yeah, like I said, a nudity, while it's gratuitous, it's not really part five gratuitous. It's not part five gratuitous. I'll give you that. What do I think of the gore? It's pretty good for what it's own. It's actually not as violent, not as gory as Final Friday. It tried to be more simplistic, kind of like part like the first movies were, and which I think is a good fleet because they try to connect more with Paramount, the Paramount ones, which I think is cool and everything. But Jason with this one, that you can tell they tried mixing the Hermit from part two, the face from part three, along with his intelligence from part four, and just give him the mask, and that's it. I think he's fine. I think the new director, I think the stunt guy who played Jason was good and everything. Of course, they couldn't bring back Kane Hodder for this one because this was a new franchise, so they had to get somebody different. Whereas in Freddy vs. Jason, they could have gone with Kane, and everybody would have liked the film better. I would have liked the film better. I would have started watching it at this point, but I'm not. So 2009's fine. The sex scene with that dude, and that lady was, man, did it go on forever. Even in the killer cut, which I have, I only had the killer cut, but it has the theatrical cut too, But even then, it's just like wow, that scene went on forever and ever and everything. Like I said, if I had to rate this film on its own, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Next to the Friday franchise, I give it a 6.5, probably a 5 at best. Really, it's pretty good. Like I said, it's a 5, 6 out of 5. It's not good. What am I saying? On its own, it's a 7. Like I said, but aside from that, there's not much to say. Like I said, I haven't seen these movies a lot. I only want to talk about 1 through 7 because those are my ones I remember seeing the most, and I watched the most. Really, not that I don't plan on catching on New Line ones, but it's gonna be a long while till you see me talking about those ones individually later. So that's why I wanted to make this film video today, and not only because it's Friday the 13th again, but also because I don't think you're going to see me talk about this again unless, of course, I get around to seeing the New Line ones, which, like I said, is going to be a long while. So might as well do the video now. Before I go, like I said, I want to thank you all for, especially all those viewers who saw my Blu-ray collection part 2 and part 1 videos. That one has the most viewed on my channel, the most views on my channel. I can't help but say thank you guys and everything because both those videos combined have 14,000 total views, which is like an amazing feat. I thank you guys for watching those videos. I don't think everybody will watch them because of my talking pattern or the fact that I'm not pretty good at editing. In fact, I'm doing all this video, including this video, in one take. I'm doing my best to articulate and everything. I really am trying my best here, guys. But I really thank you, including my 74 subscribers, for watching this video and actually subscribing to me when I did. I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, thank you guys. I thank you for actually subscribing, because I would thank you would want to watch me and everything, especially when I'm not reviewing yet, all that stuff. But thank you guys for watching, especially for watching this video. I wish you guys a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all that stuff. And to all you Friday friends, Happy Friday the 13th on this December the 13th. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video I plan to make soon after Christmas Day, because I want to show you my new stuff. And along with my birthday stuff, which I'll probably show. I usually want to show in this video, but this video is already running long anyway. But yeah, thank you for this, guys, and I'll see you next time. Yeah, this is Game Dude, over and out.